thank you all for coming. I mean, first off, Pebble is if anything a community of people who build the watch, build apps, use it, and give us feedback, and we all appreciate that. So thank you. Thanks for coming out. Thanks for supporting us. Thanks for backing us. And I'm excited about a number of things. I'm excited about you guys being here and getting the chance to chat about what we're working on, as well as some of the new products that we're rolling out and how I think people will use them, use smartwatches and use wearables that Pebble makes over the next couple of years. I've been working on smartwatches for close to almost 8.5 years now. I just remarked earlier to a friend that I probably have worn a smartwatch for longer than any other human on the planet, which is a little bit of an odd fun fact. But I think we've learned a lot as makers of Pebble, as users of Pebble, and as a company about what people are looking for in a smart wearable, how to build them, what features need to be there, what platform or what ecosystem we need to build around the product, and how we bring those out into the world. We've built a number of products over the years, 5 watches up until now, adding another 2. And I think they've changed and evolved over time, and I wanted to explain some of the reasoning behind that and kind of some of the direction where we're taking it. When Pebble started, we were actually making a smartwatch that worked for a phone. You guys might remember it was called BlackBerry. It's a very popular smartphone for a little while. We were based in Waterloo, Ontario, and the first watch that we actually made worked exclusively with BlackBerry. When we got down to the Valley in 2011, we learned a little bit about this thing called iPhone and Android, these 2 new phones that I hadn't really even seen. And we started working on what would become Pebble, the first smartwatch for iPhone and Android. We launched that in 2012 with a very simple message. If you look back at our first Kickstarter, we said that Pebble did a couple things. It would show you text messages. It would let you control your music. You could download watch faces, and I guess the fourth one was it talked to running apps like Runkeeper or Map My Run. And that was it. We were really, I think we had learned from our first version of the product, and we had learned that, this is not, what goes onto your wrist is not meant to be this complex supercomputer that can do everything under the sun. We talked about 4 key things that the watch could do. And for a while, probably, the App Store for Pebble only came out in 2013, but for a while, that was what Pebble was, a smart, simple notifier that sat on your wrist. In the intervening years between 2013, when we started shipping Pebble, and the App Store came out in 2014. How come I forgot that? In the intervening years, we've learned a lot from you, from our users, from our developers, from people at the company, from competitors. We've learned about what's possible or what could be possible on the wrist, and maybe some things that are possible that just shouldn't be on the wrist. And I think we've improved our kind of focus. We've narrowed down kind of what Pebble is and what Pebble isn't, as well as what we'll be working on into the future. Pebble, in its current state in 2016, is very similar to what we pitched on Kickstarter with our third campaign. We're very transparent. We're open about what we are and what we aren't. Pebble makes a damn good watch. We work hard on making sure that it fulfills the kind of the essence of what needs to be on your wrist and what has been for hundreds of years in the form of a timepiece. And we've added a couple smart things that we think are kind of the ground level things that many of you use in common. Things like the notifications, health tracking, sleep tracking, activity tracking, watch faces, simple, quick, easy to use apps. We built this as the core offering. This is what Pebble does. We build the hardware, we build the core baseline of the operating system, and we built out a couple of these core, using the word core, I probably should think about that a little bit more. The main things that people use when they turn on a Pebble and put it on their wrist. And I think that's our shit. I was going to say core competency. That's where we sit. That's our main role that we play in this universe of wearables. We're absolutely not trying to build a device that does everything under the sun. We're not necessarily the company that builds all the software ourselves. We've chosen a couple things to focus on. More recently, we've actually focused much more on health and fitness. You've seen the announcement of Pebble Health in December this year when we rolled out mobile charts on the phone, the API that lets developers build apps that interact with your health data. That will continue. We'll be exposing an amazing heart rate API that enables developers to retrieve heart rate from the user in terms of your past heart rate as well as your current heart rate. And as we move into the running space with Pebble Core, which is the new product, we'll be building out functionality for people who run, for people who cycle, and want to use or want to do more active fitness with the GPS and music. So we've chosen those areas of focus. We've selected them because they're based on kind of the data. This is what people do with smartwatches. This is how people use wearables. It's been now 3 years since we started shipping the original Pebble. It's not kind of a mystery anymore. We have a pretty solid understanding of how people use these watches and how people kind of live their life with this piece of technology on their wrist. And so in 2016, what we shared on Kickstarter and what I'm sharing now is our path forward. We've launched 2 new amazing watches that you can check out this evening by asking a Pebbler or finding someone who's wearing one. We think they're the pinnacle of what we've built into smartwatches. We've added new sensors. We've added kind of new software functionality that exposes a really quick way of getting something done through a new framework that we're calling Actions. And I think at the end of the day, it's not everything. It's not everything under the sun. We've made some decisions about what doesn't go into our hardware. And we've been very conscientious about preserving some of the things that I know you love and that I love about our products, like the battery life, the water resistance, the durability, the affordability, and the ability to run your own software on it. Because we believe that, when we put a hardware on our body, when we bring new technology into our life, it deserves to be an open platform that other people can build on top of and contribute to. And all these things were kind of things that we were working on for years coming up till now, but they were always focused on watches. 5 watches, 6 if you include the BlackBerry one right at the beginning. Have all of our efforts, all of our technology had been focused on watches, on watches on your wrist. In the last probably year and a half, we started interacting a lot more with people in the health community, people who use smartwatches and other wearables to track their health, their wellness, and their fitness. And we spotted an area of opportunity. We talked to a bunch of people who use Pebble to run. They track their runs with the watch. They have it synced with Runkeeper, or Strava, or Endomondo, or Map My Run. And one of the pieces of feedback that we got was that even though they loved Pebble as a heads-up display for their stats and their information while they're running, they still ended up carrying their phone. People gave us feedback. They said, I would love to just carry a watch or just carry a wearable or a Garmin or one of the other products, but I end up taking my phone because I listen to music, I use the GPS to track my run, and in an emergency, there's always, maybe I need to call an Uber or check when the next bus schedule is or call a friend in case something rough happens. And that's why I take my phone. I don't take it because it's heavy. I don't take it because it's bulky and it sits on my arm. That's not why I want it. So we looked at that and we thought about making a watch that could kind of do everything, solve this exact problem. How could we build a damn good smartwatch that was also that offered a great running experience? People use their phone to listen to music on Spotify and Pandora on all these different streaming apps, and it's tough. We looked at doing that on the watch. We looked at bringing all of that technology and putting it into a tiny circle on your wrist. Unfortunately, we just, we weren't able to cram it onto there, and I think it's a good thing too, because what we realized is when you split it up, that functionality, the great smartwatch wearable experience on your wrist, and the kind of connection to the internet, sensors, music storage, and you put that into a tiny little square that fits onto your keychain or sits on your wrist or clips onto your belt, and you kind of let this do the job that it's best at: streaming music, using GPS, using emergency communication over 3G, and you let the watch do what it's really good at: an ambient display, something that reads your heart rate, has sensors, and you pair them together. It becomes kind of that perfect perfect solution for that exact problem. And that's how we happened upon the idea for Pebble Core. I have to be very careful about making too many puns because it's fairly easy. But now that I thought about it, I just have to say them. Think of Pebble Core as a tiny Android computer without a screen. We've built out the first app for Pebble Core. That's the running experience. That's the Spotify integration that we've worked on. That's the integration with Under Armour, Strava, Runkeeper to track your run. And it's a wireless connection between the core and your watch to get those stats at a glance on your wrist. Or if you don't want to carry a watch while you run, just putting this in your pocket, pressing the button, listening to music, tracking your run with GPS, and in an emergency, maybe calling an Uber or sending a text. That's the first app. We built that. But by no means is that the last thing that people will do with Pebble Core. Pebble Core is a tiny Android computer, a tiny hackable Android computer that fits into your pocket, has a battery, has a 3G connection, has a headphone jack, has a couple buttons, 4 gigs of memory, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and the opportunity to build anything practically on top of it. We've had a ton of developers contact us since we launched Pebble, the third Kickstarter, with ideas on how people could use Pebble Core to help them in their daily life, to act as an anything button, or even in some cases to replace their phone. You know, similar to how we were saying that with Pebble Core, you can now replace the phone when you go for a run. We've been contacted with people who, don't necessarily like to use their phone at all moments and love the idea of being able to have this tiny little connection to the internet stored in their pocket, accessible at any time. We partnered with Amazon to bring Amazon Alexa to Pebble Core. It's the first implementation of Alexa outside the home. So we're really excited about that. How many, actually, I'll take this opportunity to do a little poll. How many people have used Alexa before? That's pretty cool, about half. How many people have an Echo at home? A little bit less than a third. It's going to be interesting. I'm very excited about voice interfaces, NLP, and kind of the future of how you can interact with the world through short, quick little intents. And yeah, that's a little bit of my speech. I'm sure we've got a lot more to cover today. I can answer a couple questions if anyone has any. I know that Kat and the team is going to be much more focused on the developer side of things. I can make up answers, but they can actually give you the right ones. But I'll grab a couple. Yeah. It's an Android. It's a standard kind of stock Android chipset. We're running Android 5.0 on the core. So how does Pebble Core work with iPhone or Android? It works with both phone platforms. We'll actually work with the existing Pebble app on your phone. So the way that you configure it is you open up the Pebble app, set up your Spotify information, and then it just synchronizes over the internet through Wi-Fi with your core. You can also talk by Bluetooth with the phone and the core. Cool. Well, I'll be around. I'm happy to show it off in a bit. But yes, definitely. Next up is who's up next? Kat. Thank you.
Thanks. Don't tell Eric, but there was a second slide he was supposed to go to when he talked about the core. So I'm going to be talking about the SDK4 developer preview. By quick show of hands, who here is a developer? Oh, excellent. That's exciting. So most of you, all of you, I hope, are super, super excited about SDK4. That's a ton of cool new functionality and fun new watches to play with. Have I done this yet? By show of hands, who's played with it so far? Couple people, few people. One person not from Pebble. That's pretty cool. So what I want to talk about today is a little bit about how we thought about designing these user experiences and how we thought about designing the developer experiences and making sure that they're sort of the best possible experiences for you as a developer, and that in turn turns out to be the best experiences for the users. And so rather than actually diving right into the SDK, which I know you're probably all dying to see, I wanted to talk a tiny, tiny bit about our design philosophy. This was the design philosophy that we used when we were coming up with a lot of the elements of Firmware 4 and SDK 4 to think about how do we want people to use our watches and how do we want people to write apps to watches. Yeah, that's cool. Let's turn notifications off. Thanks, Mom. So, so this is our core design philosophy. So the first one is focus on speed and efficiency. So what this is really about is if you think about how you use your smartwatch and how you want to use your smartwatch, the reason you do it is so that you don't need to pull out your phone. So if your apps are difficult to use, or if apps are difficult to use, or they're complicated or convoluted, it makes it another barrier to just, open up that app in your phone. There's a few apps that when I use them on a daily basis, I keep them in quick launch on my watch. But if I stop using them regularly, I replace it with something else and just open it up on my phone. So it's for the really common things. Minimize app interactions. This is kind of similar to focusing on speed and efficiency. What this is all about, and what you'll see throughout all of these slides, is that a lot of what we've been trying to do is make it so that you don't need to click buttons much, because clicking buttons sucks. It's not very fun compared to looking at a watch that is just doing what you want it to do. And so some of the things to think about with this, and actually one of the things that I think is really interesting that we don't talk about a lot, is that when you're thinking about speed and efficiency and minimizing app interactions, something a lot of people don't necessarily think about is that the first interaction that a developer takes, or that a user takes with your app, is launching it, which means as soon as your app launches, that means the user wants to do something. And if you can start thinking about what they want to do, you can develop better experiences. The last one, of course, is be device appropriate. Eric talked to this quite a bit, but what this is really about is don't try to design mobile experiences for your watch. You will end up in a terrible, terrible place, and it will be not very much fun. So think about the platform. Think about, people are looking at it like this. People are trying to get quick information and take quick actions. So focus everything on that and ignore everything else. Strip away your apps to the bare minimum for what you need to accomplish the tasks you want to sort of set out to achieve. So some more specifics. This is what the new system navigation looks like in 4.0. And one of the things that I really like about this is it provides sort of a lot more really quick contextual information. So clicking up now takes you to health, which gives you contextual information about how you're doing in your day and what's going on physically. Clicking down takes you to timeline, which shows you what's going on in your day and what's sort of coming up. We've added this new element, which we talked about in our Kickstarter updates, called Timeline Peak. And we'll explore this a little bit later. But basically, the operating system is now able to overlay a little banner at the bottom of watch faces to display upcoming and ongoing events. So I'm super, super excited about this because my work calendar is usually, or can sometimes just be like a stack of meetings. So I go to the Timeline Future a lot when I'm trying to figure out like what's my next meeting, where do I need to go. And the cool thing about Timeline Peak and thinking back to those design philosophies is makes it easier to figure out what's going on, and I don't need to click as many buttons. So that's a win. And then the last part is the new and improved launcher. So there's two things to note about the launcher that's kind of cool. The first is that all of the apps can be reordered now, including system apps. And the other is that your apps can actually display information. So developers now have the ability to set the app's icon and subtitle through code. So this means that when people go into the launcher, they're not necessarily going to open an app. They might just be going to get useful information. So this is something that you really need to think about, because what it means is if you think about that launcher, there's 4 apps that are immediately visible when you go to it. Those apps might be useful actions the user wants to take, but they might also just be apps that have good information. So in this example, there's a few that have, I don't know if you guys can see it, this ended up kind of grainy. But one of the apps is the weather app. And I'm probably never going to open the weather app. But having it in the launcher means I can click with one button and always get weather information. So the way that this works is we're going to talk about this new API called the App Glance API. So the visual representation of an app in the launcher is called an app's glance because it's glanceable information. An app can have multiple glances, or it can change over time. And each one of these snapshots is called a slice. And slices consist of what icon you want to display, what message you want to display, and an expiration time. So by adding multiple slices at once to the same app glance, you're actually able to have it so that the message will change over time without the app being opened. And so the way that this works, this is actually a fairly simple API. There's two main calls that you need to be aware of. One of them to reload the app classes, and one of them to add slices. So this is our example, and this is what it looks like. So the first thing you do is when you're usually probably in your deinit code, that's a really good place, you're going to call app-class reload, and you're going to pass it a callback and some data if you want. I'm passing null because I'm lazy. Once this call happens, the app-class callback basically immediately gets invoked with some handy parameters that are generated by the system. The first one is a pointer to this app-class reload session, which is just sort of this object that we use for calls later on. Second parameter is the limit. One of the kind of weird things about this API, or kind of interesting things about this API, is that the number of slices that you can add to your app class might change. It probably won't. It probably shouldn't. You will usually get 8, but sometimes you might not. So you always want to be respectful of that and make sure you don't try to add too many. And the last one is a pointer to the data that you passed in. So in this example, what we're doing is once we call the reload function, our callback fires, we create a new app client slice, and then we add it. And the result you can see on the right, there's a tiny app at the top that says my app, and under it, hello launcher. This was a cool example made by Kevin, who's in the audience somewhere in the back. Thank you. So this is AppGlance. This is sort of a tiny, tiny introduction to it. We have full guides on all of the APIs we're introducing and docs in the developer site. We'll have lots of handy links at the end. So timeline peak. Who here makes watch faces? Ooh. Who here makes watch apps? More than you put up your hands when I asked if you were a developer. Who's made a Pebble app before? Okay. You all need to make more Pebble apps, it looks like. And watch faces. All right, so watch faces. So timeline peak is this cool new element in firmware 4. And timeline peak, if you develop watch faces, you're probably kind of thinking, that's a bummer, because it covers up some of your watch face. But we've thought about this. And so what we've done is we've created some APIs so that developers can do two things. Developers can either register to a set of callback handlers that will fire when different parts of timeline peak, when different parts of the animation occur. So when it starts to transition, once it's in the middle of transition, and once it's done. Or you can also just, here we go, here's the API. So up at the top, we have all of the handlers. There's a function to subscribe and unsubscribe to them. But the one at the bottom is the other sort of really interesting one, which is this new function for layers, which lets you get the unobstructed bounds. And when you call this function, it's going to return back the bounds of the layer that are displayed in the screen and not covered by system overlays, which doesn't necessarily mean the layer will be visible, which is an important thing to realize, because if your layer is positioned off screen, this will just return the same thing as layer get bounds. These are technical details we're not going to go into too deeply. So here's what a very, very basic example looks like. So in this example, the developer is controlling their own rendering through an update proc. And if your watch face works like this is actually a really, really easy case to handle. All you really need to do is make sure you do two things. The first is when you grab your bounds for the watch face, make sure you grab the unobstructed bounds, not the full bounds. And that's what you're going to use to draw all of your elements on the screen. With the one exception of you always want to make sure that you fill the background layer, whether it's with a solid color or an image, and you want to fill the whole thing. Because if your animations lag behind the system, then there's going to be this black bar that was where timeline peak was, and now it's not. So by drawing it the same color or the same image as the rest of your app or your watch face, you'll be good. This is the sort of more complicated and scary looking example, but it's really not too bad. So what's going on here is this is what it looks like. This is what it can look like if you're using the handlers to handle all of these events. So how timeline peak app works is when a peak is displayed, a little bar from the bottom is animated and pops up. And when it's dismissed, it animates and goes back down. So there's these 3 states to animation. There's when the animation begins, after it's completed, and then while it's in progress. And you have callbacks for each of these. And the callback in the middle, the one for while it's changing, actually gets triggered on each redraw. So typically what you want to do is during that would be sort of where you reposition elements to be in line with the rest of the unobstructed area. And so by doing this, you're able to sort of adjust your watch faces so that either you hide elements that you don't want to display when timeline peak is enabled, or you might just sort of shift things around. You might compress things. It's up to you as the developer to figure out what how your watch face should react to timeline peak, if it does at all. But the best experience will probably be doing something. So this is what the code example looks like for using handlers. In this example, to show you how simple it is, all we're using is the .change handler. So we create our handlers, we subscribe to them, and then every time it changes, all we're going to do for this example is we're going to calculate what 10% from the top is of the unobstructed area, which is kind of a weird way to position something from the top rather than the bottom for percentages if you want it to shift. But that's fine, this works. And what will happen is each time the change update fires, the layer get unobstructed bounds is going to return a slightly larger, slightly smaller bounds than the previous animation. And each time it's going to get redrawn, so your object will actually animate along with the peak. All right, and one-click action. So this was another one of the things that Eric touched on briefly. One of the things that we're really, really trying to get developers to think about and be really good at is writing apps that are really, really simple and that involve as little interaction as possible. And so this is not so much a feature, although it is enabled by some of the new features that we've created. It's more of sort of a new pattern for developers to follow. And the goal of writing a one-click action app is that after the user opens the app from the launcher, there should be no more or minimal interaction. Ideally, no more clicks, maybe a dialogue if you're taking like a voice note or something. But the goal is really the app should be able to be configured to know credentials and store them, and there should be a very specific thing that it does. The example we have on our dev site is for a lockatron lock, and all it does is it locks or unlocks it. It toggles the state. So it's a relatively simple app. Right now, you can't manage multiple locks from it, but it's designed to be sort of a front door app that you might store in the top of your launcher or in quick launch so that you can just really quickly with a single button toggle it. And so the way you kind of think about designing these is there's these 4 different states. The user launches the application. When that happens, you actually need to do a few checks because you need to figure out if the user launched it or if the system launched it. For example, when it's installed or if they're configuring it, because if you're configuring the app, you don't want to take an action. Next, you actually take the action. This will typically be making some kind of a request to a web service. That's sort of where we see one-click actions probably being the most useful. There's not a lot you can do inside of an app without talking to the internet with one click, I think. I would love to be proved wrong, though. After that, if it works, you get a confirmation message, and then it auto-closes and returns you to the watch face, which is one of the cool new things you can do in SDK 4. And if it fails, it just sort of displays a message and stays there. I thought there was another slide. That's cool. The other thing I wanted to talk about, we're getting near to the end for questions, was Pebble packages. Who's a Pebble developer and knows that we released packages last week? Last week. A couple people. Cool. So for those of you who don't know, in SDK and firmware 3.13, we released a new feature to the Pebble tool in Cloud Pebble that lets you have packages super, super easily. So we've leveraged the cool infrastructure of NPM as the actual sort of back end to it, and we've designed it so that it's really easy to build and compile apps with libraries. We shipped this last week. There are already 22, I think, at my last count, packages published. Some of my favorite ones are up here. but there's a ton more to go check out. And the thing that I think is really cool, a lot of times when we release new features, a whole bunch of Pebblers or Pebble employees will make cool things with it and publish them. And then the community will be somewhat dormant. But with this feature, actually, more than half of the packages that have been published, if I counted right, actually came from our community. So that's amazing. And it's really great to see more people from Pebble collaborating and sharing open source code. So I think this will really help manage a lot of the more difficult tasks. So here's some of the libraries you might be interested in as a Pebble developer. Pebble Clay is this incredible framework we've been working on internally that not only makes making configuration pages for your apps really easy, but makes them offline, which means you don't need an internet connection. So if you're building configurable watch apps, you definitely want to check that out. Yuri's Pebble Effects Layer is a fairly well-known library even before we had packages. He's ported it to be an actual package, and we're super excited to see what sort of having it be really easy to access allows. The Pebble Events library improves all of the Pebble event services. The really cool thing about this one is if you're building any other libraries on top of the event service, this makes it so that they can be managed across multiple different libraries and sort of share functionality. Pebble Localize makes localization simple. I'm not sure how many people are actually building localized apps in this room, but that's sort of another way to extend the experience and make it even better. This makes it super easy to do. OWM Weather is Open Weather Map. This is lots of Pebble developers' favorite or / default weather service. So we've wrapped it up in the library so you can just download it really, really quickly. You can read the rest. Linked lists. So the really cool thing about this is prior to this, the way that you shared code was you kind of went, hey, I have some code. And you posted a link somewhere, and then if people liked your code, they would go and they would take their mouse and they would drag it, and then they'd press Command C or Control C, and then they'd go to another file and press Control V. It was like a very, very manual process, which makes sharing code difficult. And so with this, with libraries, there's a single source you can go to see all of the libraries that have been published for Pebble. And there's command line instructions and Cloud Pebble integration for looking at those packages and installing them. So all you need to do if you want to add weather to your app is say, let's see if I can get this right, Pebble package install Pebble OWM weather, and that'll download the package for you and you're ready to go. So this is super, super great. If you guys are working on apps, I really, really encourage you to try to find ways to make your work modular and shareable, because that's really how the community gets to the next level, is by sharing code and sharing functionality. And last but not least, a very, very brief look at the developer roadmap. Sometime in late August, we're planning to release the official SDK 4 release. This is going to include support for building for Pebble Time 2, which is called the Emory platform, tools for testing the HRM API, support for building and installing your apps on real hardware. Hooray. Right now, you can only build for the emulator. And an initial version of our embedded JavaScript API. So one of the things that we've kind of been talking about alongside all of our new products is we are working really, really hard to make it so that you can write JavaScript apps that run on the watch. For those of you who might use Pebble.js, there's this magical layer of abstraction that some people know about and some people don't. So Pebble.js is actually a library built on top of PebbleKit.js. And what it does is it just sends a ton of app messages back and forth between the watch and the phone to indicate whenever state changes, whenever events occur. And there's this really, really complicated C app running that you don't notice that renders everything, that sends events when buttons are pressed. And the downside of this is if you've developed with Pebble.js, you probably know your phone needs to be connected, which is a bummer. So with embedded JavaScript APIs, we're actually working to have a JavaScript runtime on the watch itself. We've done that in 3.12. We shipped our first version of the runtime. And if you're running TikTok on a Pebble Time or Pebble Time Steel, you are running JavaScript code on your watch. So that's cool. And then sometime before we ship the core, we think sometime probably late 2016, but we're still locking down details. There will be some kind of core SDK developer preview. More information soon, TM, in the Pebble way. Lastly, we're going to make these slides available. We'll tweet them out after. But these are just a ton of resources for you to go take a look at. This is where you can pull out your phone and take the picture of the presentation if you want. This will get you started with all of the APIs we talked about. You can view all of the release notes, everything else. This is sort of where you want to start if you want to start playing with this functionality. And that's it. Thank you very much. I want to open up the floor to any kind of question. There's, I think, about a dozen or so Pebble employees here, so we'll sort of disperse questions as appropriate. Yes. Can I go back a slide? Yes, let's stay here for a bit. Yes, another question.
The active icons, I can't what you call those, the glance icons, is that just for apps, or what does happen to those two?
Yeah, so the question was for the app glance icons. Are those just for apps, or are they for watch faces too? Right now, they're just for apps. The glances are designed to be quick glanceable information, and having to open a second app, which is the watch faces app, kind of removes the point of that a lot. Yes.
Are the glances, can they be animated?
Can the glances be animated? No. The answer is no, I've been told. Other questions? Yes. How are glances shown on the round version? So we actually didn't show an image of this, but it's going to be very, very similar. The only difference is the launcher will be in the round menu style, which means you're going to have the selected icon in the middle, or the selected app in the middle. But other than that, it will be formatted similarly in a round way. I think there was actually somebody on our Slack channel like yesterday who already wrote a round app glance. Yes.
This might be more of a business question. What drives Pebble to keep your platform separate from Android and iOS? And have you ever thought about coming up with another product which obviously flawlessly integrates with those platforms?
So the question was, let me see if I can paraphrase this. Why do we keep our platforms separate from iOS and Android? And have we ever thought of bringing them together? I'm going to punt this one. Who wants to take this from Pebble? Where's Eric when you need him? Yeah, I don't think I can give you a good answer for that. Sorry. Other questions? Yes.
With the new peak support, if you just ignore that stuff and just keep drawing, what happens? Bad things?
So the question was, if you just ignore the peak and you keep drawing, what happens? So do you mean drawing under it? It just draws under it. So the whole point of one of the things that I think we learned from Pebble Time Round and launching it is if you force developers to update their apps and significantly update them, then it sort of trickles while things get updated. So one of the things that we've been trying to be really conscious of is making sure that existing experiences continue to work as expected. So for watch faces, the timeline peak just gets drawn over it. If you don't have an app glance, it works just like the current one. What am I missing? I think I'm missing something, but I'll remember later. Other questions? Yes.
How long does an app glance stay on the screen? And is that configurable or is it fixed?
So the question was, how long does an app glance stay on the screen and is that configurable? So the way it actually works is, I did a poor job explaining this, sorry. The way the app glance API works is when you create the app glance, you create it as part of the application lifecycle. So you create it while the app is running. And that persists until the expiration time. So when you open the launcher, if there is an app glance slice that hasn't expired yet, it will constantly be displayed there until it expires.
Sorry, I used the wrong term. I meant the peak.
Oh, the peak. How long does the peak stay there? I believe it pops up 10 minutes before events. It might be 5. And then it will stay for the remainder for ongoing events.
There's no background updating for the glances at this point in time?
Is there background updating for the glances was the question. At the time, there isn't, I believe. That is something we could possibly look at, but it's not something we've planned so far.
I have another one. Does the package manager implement packages.json as well? So you kind of just generate a packages.json file and you can...
Yeah, so the question was, does the Pebble package stuff generate a package.json? It does. Actually, one of the changes as part of integrating a little bit more with npm.js is your existing app.json files for apps and packages get converted to package.json. So app.json is deprecated now. Long live package.json. Yes.
So this is partly answered by JS running on the watch, but I was going to ask about C apps calling into JavaScript APIs now that there are these packages. Is there a bridge in that direction as well?
That's interesting. So we've actually talked about bridging from JavaScript to C, but I don't think the other way around. That's not something that we've planned yet in either case. It's something we've sort of looked at, but will probably be very high effort from the looks of things just because of sort of how you separate apps and programming languages. But there possibly, I think the main way you would integrate with, the big thing you get with JavaScript packages, there's some functionality. A lot of them are based around web things. A lot of them are based around web services. And so usually you would just have like an app message that calls from your C app, and then you use the JS package that you installed.
Yes. Yeah, with that in mind, would you recommend for a newbie developer to program exclusively in JavaScript, or I'm not quite sure.
So the question was, for a newbie developer, would we encourage you to develop exclusively in JavaScript or use C or something else? I'm going to start a flame war if I try to answer this question, because people who like programming languages like them a lot. It depends what you want to do. I think JavaScript is a really easy language to learn. C can be an easy language to learn. It can also kind of be hell. There's like a long list of descriptions of different programming languages, and the description of C is something along the lines of like, you're given a very, very large gun and you're able to shoot yourself in the foot with it. And so C can be really, really powerful. Learning C will let you learn a lot of sort of the lower level fundamentals of how programming works. People tend to pick up JavaScript quickly, maybe partly because of the community, partly because of the language, partly any number of things. That said, we have been working on and should soon have an updated version of a textbook aimed at teaching C through the lens of Pebble development. So if you are looking to learn and you're interested in learning C, that's a great starting point. And we'll tweet out links to that once it's ready. Yes.
What's the sample rate of the heart rate manager?
The question was, what's the sample rate of the heart rate monitor? This is actually something you can set programmatically. So one of the things to note is the heart rate APIs were included in the developer preview, but they don't really do anything because there's nothing feeding them right now. So that's actually something that you can set as a developer. You can say, I need a heart rate of, or a heart rate period, or I need information this quickly, and you'll be able to request that and get it. I can't remember offhand the actual specific range that you'll be able to get. I think it's maybe sampling like once every 10 seconds up to pretty much as quickly as it can sample. But obviously there's a lot of battery life implications if you're sampling very quickly for a long time.
The fastest is once per second.
Fastest is once per second? Yes.
So before Pebble Health launched, I had an idea about an app that would basically remind you of something as soon as you got up. Are we going to be able to get that kind of event when the health API is open?
So the question was, have we looked at any functionality for triggering events based on like waking up, going to sleep, other things like that? I don't think we've started, well, I think we've probably started exploring that, but I don't think we've sort of looked at actually implementing any of that. I'm happy to be told I'm wrong on this though. But if you look at the updated health docs, you can get a good idea of what's coming up in the very, very short term.
Is it still only one background app that can run?
Yes, so it's only one background app that can run. That's a limitation that still exists.
What's the upgrade path for watch apps that work today to the new display sizes?
Yeah, so the question was, what's the upgrade path for apps that exist today to the new display sizes? This is actually a really, really easy question to answer. For AppLite to Pebble 2, or from the classic Pebble to Pebble 2, there's basically no upgrade path in the sense that there's nothing you need to do except to recompile it. It has the same screen size, it has more memory. If you've written something on AppLite, it'll work on Diorite. For the time to, it's a little bit more complicated, but as I mentioned before, one of the things we learned from Pebble Time round launch was that if there's no easy path to upgrade, upgrading takes a long time, and then the App Store is sad. So there are two different things to note for the time to. First is that existing Basalt apps are going to continue to work on it, and they're going to run in something called a bezeled mode. So when it's in bezeled mode, it'll basically just make a rectangle in the center of the screen the same size, the same number of pixels as the Pebble Time, and display it there with a black bezel. Or if you want, similar to how you do everything else, you can write apps that dynamically change based on screen sizes.
Regarding background updates of finances, you might want to talk about the JavaScript and the way that
The what?
Because that enables developers to update it in the background. So
one thing I didn't mention about the AppGlance API is right now it's implemented in the C SDK. In the 4.0 release, there's definitely going to be a PebbleKit.js version of it, which means you'll also be able to update your AppGlance from JavaScript. And we're working on actually an HTTP API for it as well, which means you'll actually be able to update users' AppGlances through making a web request. This is sort of the really, really powerful use case. This is where things like Uber will be able to provide live updates to your AppGlance without needing to constantly poll, because something on their service can push to say, this is what the new status is, display that it's arriving in, I don't know, about 15 minutes. Or if you have like a Domino's pizza tracker, each time the status updates, it can push to say like, your pizza's being made, your pizza's delivered, your pizza's at your door.
So even if the app's not open, it'll still just update the glance in the launcher?
Yes, the question was, even if it's not open, it'll still update the glance in the launcher. That's correct. With the web API. With everything else, it's already open, and it will also do that.
For the Pebble Health, do you have access to historical data?
For Pebble Health, do you have access to historical data? So you do have access to historical data. I believe you will also have access to historical heart rate data. It doesn't go back indefinitely, but you can get specific periods of history.
What about sleep?
For sleep, yes. Yep.
In the case where there's a Pebble core and, say, an iPhone, both present at the same time, can an app choose which device to talk to and get data from either source?
So the question was, if an app, I assume a watch app, is connected to a phone, and there's also a Pebble core in range that it could be connected to, can it choose which one? And the answer is right now, probably not. There's going to be a core mode that you'll be able to enable on your watch to switch it into a mode so that it will sort of use the core. But it's not something where every time you open the app or whenever there's one in range, it will make that, it'll request which one you want to use. It's something you have to manually do.
So there's not a hierarchy either?
Yeah, so the question was, there's not a hierarchy. I don't believe so. Toma, can you shed more light?
If the phone is in range, you'll be connected to the phone, and then if you manually, as a user, if you switch to the core, then the core will become the primary device, and will stay the primary device until you exit that mode, and then the phone will become the primary device.
So if you go outside the range of your phone, will automatically switch over to the core?
If the core is in range, yeah, that's the... Okay, cool. But we think that most of the time the user will actually trigger switching to the core by saying, hey, I want to go for that.
I'm going to summarize real quick. Or did everybody hear? we'll summarize for the recording. So what Tomas said was your phone or your watch will connect to the phone when it's in range. You'll be able to toggle Pebble Core mode, which will disable its connection to the phone. It'll connect to the core until you disable it, and then it'll reconnect to the phone. If you leave your phone at home and you just sort of just walk away and you have your core, the intent right now is that it will automatically, your watch will automatically connect to the core if it's in range and the phone isn't. Yes?
With the new emulator for SDK4, can you emulate Peak?
Yeah, good question. So the question was, with the new emulator for SDK4, can you emulate Peak? You can if you look at the unobstructed area guide, as well as the documentation for the Pebble tool. The command is in there. I think it's Pebble QEMU dash something. But yes, you can. It doesn't toggle a real timeline peak. It just toggles an area that's the same size. Yes.
So what happens to the timeline past in this new, is there still a way to get to the timeline past?
Yeah, so the question was, what happens to the timeline past in this new era, and is there still a way to get to it? The answer is it goes away to a separate app, so you will still be able to access it, is the intent. But what we've actually, we did a lot of analysis before we made the decision to remove timeline past. And what we found was there were two main reasons why people went to timeline past. First was to check an ongoing event, because that doesn't display in timeline future. And the second was to check the weather, or things like quote of the day or other sort of daily update apps. What we found is that most of the use cases for timeline past can actually be replaced with timeline glances or other interactions. And we want to start pushing developers towards that as sort of the main way to display information.
What would the battery life be if you sampled heart rate every second?
What would the heart rate be if you sampled, or what would the battery rate be if you sampled the heart rate every second? I think about 2 days, I've heard. Between 1.5 and 2 days. Is that for both? Is that for both watches?
Probably a little more on Pebble Time 2, but it's going to depend a lot on what you do with the heart rate. If you're just collecting it and not doing anything, you're going to get a little more. But if you're actually storing it or sending it via Bluetooth or processing it in some way, then it's going to be a little more.
It's 1.2 to 2 days, maybe a bit more for the time 2. And if you're doing lots and lots of processing or storing with it, that'll obviously be more processing and cut it down. So I'm going to take maybe 2 more questions, and then we're going to have some cake, socialize a bit more, and have drinks. And we need to try and be out of this space by 9, which is in 40 minutes. We'll be around with the time 2 if you want to come look at it. And this isn't the end of asking questions. So ask us on Twitter, ask us on in person while we're here, ask us on Slack, anywhere else. So are there any final questions? Yes.
Do you plan on making a round version?
Do we plan on making a round version? I assume you mean with heart rate?
Well, no, with just the piece itself, with Pebble Time 2.
Oh, so do we plan to make a Pebble Time round 2? So earlier today, as part of one of the Kickstarter updates we published, we launched 2 new versions of the Pebble Time round with new finishes. And that was the remainder of our 2016 year model line.
How's the contrast on the time 2 screen versus the...
So the question was, how's the contrast on the time 2 screen versus the time? I encourage you to come check it out. Is there like a unit for contrast? So many units of darkness. Thank you guys all so much. Come talk to us. Actually, before we do this, let's get everybody from Pebble to stand up real quick. If you want to, or wave. Hooray, everybody from Pebble. All of them made all of this happen.